I start this reflection today with a heart that is actually extremely flooded with gratitude, and gratitude that I really want to share with each and every one of you, because last week I stood here with a pretty much overwhelming anxiety and fear and dread, and I still have many of those same feelings, and some of them even more intensely than last week. Yet, given the affirmation that I received and that was shared throughout this community and the applause, it gave me hope, and I hope it gives each and every one of you hope as well. If you weren't here, you could see the homily online, if you will. But it gives me hope because now I know, or at least I feel like I know, that together we can make a difference. Together we can walk and speak and write and protest and give voice to the voiceless. Together I realized that we can inspire hope into our hopelessness and fearlessness into our fear. We have not experienced a drastic tidal wave change in the trajectory of our current situation. In fact, some of that trajectory has been accelerated toward what I would call as a dark and unknown future. But something changed for me last week, and I hope it did for you as well. Because in some real tangible ways, I came to realize that we as a whole are not alone. We're not alone. And before that day, I was actually loathing the experience of isolation and the fear of inconsequentialism, right? The fear of being inconsequential. But now, thanks to you and thanks to that response that we had last weekend, I've actually been able to recapture some hope. Hope that we in our world, in our nation, in our church can be different. Hope that the voiceless will and do have a voice. Hope that even in this, if the situation doesn't change, at least I know in my heart and soul that I am with and walk with others who believe it should be different. That's a hope in it and of itself. And I'm bolstered by Paul's reflection today that you so beautifully proclaimed. If our hopes in Christ are limited to this life only, we are the most pitiful of the human race. If our hopes are limited only to here, we're in trouble. That's what Paul's saying. What I've come to realize is, and even more fully this week, is that gratitude is actually the parent of hope. What I've come to realize is that the more I practice gratitude, the more I begin to hope. That every time I become that practice this week, that every time I would encounter fear or dread or anxiety in my situation, I would force myself to think of and be grateful for one thing in my life, right? It was a thing that worked for me and hopefully continues to work. I'm not living in denial of the challenges and the fears and the horrific actions that I see happening in our world, but I'm making a conscious effort and a conscious decision to remember that there's also good in our world, right? There's good. And there's always something for which I can be grateful. There's always something for which I can remember is a blessing in my life. And because I've come to realize and see that the rabbit hole of anxiety and depression and hopelessness, I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's a hell of a hole. And if you start to go down that, I can remember and see that it actually can be plugged by hope. It can actually be plugged by hope. It's like the great cork in the vortex of fear, right? Hope just like stops it. And I found myself grateful for very simple things like my computer and the ability to write my thoughts. And so I did just that. I wrote to my congressional representatives. I wrote to President Trump. I wrote to the CEO of Google because I think renaming the Gulf of Mexico into the Gulf of America is stupid. Sorry, I'll just be a walls on that one. But I wrote to Google and shared some of those letters. And will those letters change the situation in the world? I have no idea. But I do know this, that I did what I could do to try my very best, given the tools at my disposal, to change a broken system in a broken world. I did what I could do. I made phone calls, I wrote letters, I sent emails. I know people will say and have said your letters won't make any difference. But I think back to 2 years ago. 2 years ago, BMO Harris, who you know is probably one of the largest banking systems in the world, right? BMO Harris threw my life into a financial mess by a simple clerical error they made. And then, when I approached them about trying to rectify the situation, they lied to me. And they made the situation worse. So I started keeping track of the amount of time and energy and hours I put into trying to get them to correct the situation, which eventually did get corrected. And I turned around and I sued them under the Fair Credit Reporting Act and said, you can't do what you did to people and break the law like you did and get away with it just because you're a huge multinational corporation. You can't do that. And many people said, ha ha ha, good luck. You know, many people said, yeah, you're just barking up the wrong tree. And maybe I was, but I filed it in small claims court, and certainly, well enough, I won the lawsuit. And 6 months later, I finally received a tiny little check from BMO Harris, which I'm sure made absolutely no difference to them, a drop in their bucket, right? But it was an admission of their clerical error and their unlawful behavior. Now, did it make any difference to BMO, or does it? Probably not. Yet maybe somebody in that department that tried to bully some little peon in St. Paul, Minnesota, and engage in some illegal runaround and deflection, maybe somebody might actually consider doing something different that won't cause them to have to engage their legal team and force them to comply with the law. Maybe. And that all happened because I decided that I had enough hope to change the system. Now, will President Trump ever read or be aware of any of my letters? Probably not. But at least someone in some office will understand where I stand and what I believe and how I believe people ought to be treated and how I expect other people in our world and our country to be treated, especially those who have no voice. So gratitude for being able to do what I could do has given me hope once again. Maybe your gratitude will give you hope as well. This week, I encourage you to drain the fear, the bullying and the illegal executive orders and the unlawful domination of others, and maybe write a letter or send an email or do a phone call or let someone else know your beliefs so that you might foster some hope in your lives as well. This week, as you encounter that drain and that fear, I invite you to just become grateful for one thing in your life that can then put the plug in the vortex of fear and disinformation. I offer you that practice, and I offer you this as well. I think it's the reason that gratitude gives birth to hope, and hope isn't just an emotion, my friends. Hope is a way of thinking. It's a way of thinking that involves expecting something good to happen, even when it's not guaranteed. Expecting something good to happen, even when it's not guaranteed. It's precisely why we named ourselves Spirit of Hope, because we believed in the possibility that things could be different, that love in the end will win no matter what. So I'm going to close today with a story that illustrates what I believe, what I believe might be happening and might be our situation. My friend and I were walking around the Barnum and Bailey circus that was in town for the week. We passed a place where the elephants were kept, and we noticed that these huge elephants, these huge massive animals, were being kept in this little pasture area, probably no bigger than this, with a tiny, what I call a tiny, probably 3/8 inch stupid nylon rope tied to their foot, and a center wheel in the center. And these big elephants were walking around. There was no fence, no gates, no cage, no nothing. My friend saw one of the trainers and said to the trainer, how come those elephants don't just and walk away? And he said, oh, it's really simple, because when they were babies, we tied them up with that exact same rope, and they couldn't get away from it. So they thought ever since then that if they had that rope around their foot, they couldn't do anything. And they continue to think that today. They grow up, they learn to believe that they can't break away. So I think there's 3 lessons, or 3 morals, and maybe 4 lessons that we come to from that story. We, like the elephants, can be held back by our limiting beliefs. Right? We can be held back by our limiting beliefs. And 2, that it is possible to break free from those limiting beliefs. And 3, that taking risks and learning from our failures can help us to achieve our goals and our dreams. That, my friends, is the moral. And I think there are 4 lessons. The lessons, I think, are this. 1, we must not let our past failures prevent us from pursuing our dreams. 2, that we must believe in our ability to achieve our goals. 3, that we can learn from every mistake we make and keep trying. And 4, that we have nothing to lose and everything to gain.